Good morning, everybody. Thanks for attending this morning. We'll give it a couple of minutes. I don't know who that third person is. We'll give it a couple of minutes just for a few more to drop in. We've got a few signed up for budgeting on a Monday morning. I'll get started just giving kind of a brief intro to the session just before Warren shares his slides. But ultimately, as many of you all know, the starting pistol for the budgeting season has sounded again. Not sure where all of you are with gag statements, but from conversations I've been having over the last week, there's been a range from some gag statements to no gag statements. I don't think anybody's got them all yet, but hopefully this week we'll see the rest of those land. But this session is going to be looking at ultimately how to coordinate a budgeting season across a number of schools. And there's a few things to that, both from a kind of team and people management perspective, but also from a what do we do about the numbers perspective. And what I'll do is I'll just let Warren, actually, let's introduce Warren, shall we? Warren?
Yeah, good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining us. So I'm Warren Porter. I'm the MAT product specialist here at IMP. I used to work as a CFO on your side of the fence before joining the business around a year and a half ago now. It's gone really quick, but I sort of did sort of budgets using Excel spreadsheets, using systems. I had one cycle, I think I did 10 cycles in total, one cycle using IMP. I appreciate, and it resonates with me in terms of how difficult managing that budget setting process actually is. So yeah, hopefully today, we can give you some useful things that are going to support you with managing that over the next 4 or 5 months.
And I don't want to steal too much of the thunder, but at the end of this session, everyone will get a cool spreadsheet. But anyway, well, I'm Will as well. So for those that don't know me, which I think is most of you, oh hello Elaine. I'm Will. I'm one of the co-founders at IMP. I've been, well, September 2010. Michael Gove popped up and created this thing called academies, or put some kind of emphasis behind academies. At the time I was working for a firm of accountants, and a load of my customers kind of went and created an academy. So since that point in 2010 I've been working in academy and MAT finance through a couple of different providers. But yeah, 5 years ago we started IMP. Warren, can you pop
my screen?
Yeah. And this is going to be COVID-esque in terms of next slide, please. Actually, no, we'll go. Actually, previous slide, please, Warren. So I'll introduce IMP very, very shortly. But this session here, MAT Budgeting 101, ultimately how to achieve a cohesive approach across your schools. There's a few parts to that Warren's gonna take it through. Before we get to that, I'm just going to do a brief intro for IMP. So Warren, if you could just skip on one more. So IMP, Integrated MAT Platform, if anyone's wondering what IMP stands for. So we are the only provider built specifically for MATs that offers forecasting software, budgeting software, integrated ICFP software, and also granular reporting. So ultimately the way our system works is all of the schools using our system to forecast where they're going to be at the end of the year. And the byproduct of that process is it's creating a year-end outturn, but it's also creating the next 5 years budget. I say automatically, that's probably not as easy as it sounds, but ultimately you're doing a continuous forecast in IMP, doing both your management accounts and your year-end outturn, along with your budget setting as well. Because we've got so many data points within IMP, so we've got your staff data, finance, budget, pupil, payroll, curriculum and class data. Most people tend to use IMP as their primary reporting tool. So that is the last of the sales pitch for this session. This is going to be, obviously we know you guys are not using IMP. We'd love to have a conversation to change that, but this session is very much around actually how you can manage this process outside of it. And a lot of what we're talking about today is going to be things that we've come across with the nearly 400 trusts that are using us. So we're working with nearly 400 trusts across just over 4,000 schools and helping them with their budget cycle. And when you deal with this many organizations, you realize how differently each of these trusts approach this time of year, both in terms from a systems perspective, a people management perspective, a communication perspective, and we're trying to take kind of cherry pick the most interesting and common things that we see across those, to hopefully help you guys with another successful round of budgets.
Fantastic. So we'll sort of dive into the meat of the session then. I guess I was alluding to this at the start, but we know that managing and coordinating that budget across a trust, whether that's 2 schools, 10 schools, 30 schools, is difficult. And you've got to make sure that you're communicating your timeframes and they're adhered to in terms of what you're asking for. You've agreed any assumptions, and that could be a moving set of assumptions because things are changing all of the time. They're applied consistently across all of your schools. Any critical budget tasks are done and checks are in place to make sure that they're done accurately. And it's just about creating the most robust and well thought through budget possible that's aligned to, I guess, your curriculum, goals and plans, and that teaching and learning offer and pupil experience in future years. As part of this session, well, I guess we're trying to support you guys with navigating that budget setting season and give you a bit of confidence to ensure that those budgets are created in the smartest way possible. I thought I'd pull out this slide from the Academy Trust Handbook. I'm sure you're all familiar with this document. You're reading it every single day because it's really important. But it's just highlighting that you're one entity. As part of your risk management framework and principles, you're expected to coordinate and plan that budget across the trust. It's one submission at the end of the year. So generally it's person in central team, CFO, management accountants, finance business partners who are having to make sure that that budget is managed, rolled out, rolled up, and then submitted as one thing for the trust. Like I say, I know it's a really difficult thing to do. When I used IMP, it made life a lot easier. But nevertheless, I don't want to say it's like herding cats. That's probably a bit insulting, but it's a difficult thing to manage across a large number or a number of schools. You've got your local governing body meetings, trustee approval, all of those things that are happening, which make it tricky to navigate. So there are 3 sort of main areas we're going to focus on today. The first is top budgeting tips when preparing your budgets. The second is then some top tips when reviewing your budget. So we've split it out into 2 sort of key areas, those tips that or things that you'll be doing during the preparation stage of the budget, and then those things once you've got through the chunk of that preparation, the good things to do that are going to help you when you're reviewing the numbers, and then finally we'll stole my thunder, but the template that we've created to support you with managing a budget and timeframes and assumptions across a number of schools and the trust in total. So I will move on to firstly budget.
What we'll also do, Warren, actually, is at the end of this session we'll send you guys links to the blogs on our website that kind of give a bit more detail on each of these points, and it's also worth pointing out these are our top tips that we've kind of come up with through conversations with all the trusts we work with. Some of you will be doing some of these, all of these, none of these. You might have different top tips. I'm sure you're all in different places in terms of systems, people, size of trust and things. So this is by no means an exhaustive list of what you need to be doing as CFOs during this period, but hopefully a list of things where you're going to at least pick up some potentially different approaches that might work within your context. But as we know, there is no one size fits all, and all trusts operate differently. The contexts are all different. The team structures are different. The systems are different, and hopefully you'll be able to take away some of this info and apply it in your trust. And if you do, that's a successful session as far as we're concerned.
We've got a Q&A as well. We didn't mention that. So there's a Q&A. If you want to ask any questions, pop them in there. We'll do our best to get through them.
They'd never guess that we're accountants, not Zoom presenters, Warren, would they? From the slickness of the webinar so far.
So budget preparation top tips. So we've got 10 of these. Start with top tip 1. So analyzing your pupil number predictions using local authority and admissions data. We know that pupil numbers are the key driver of your income line. You know, gag funding, pupil premium funding, all of those things are you know, reliant on you getting pupils bums on seats through the door. So it's a really I mean, it goes without saying that you need to you need to be predicting your pupil numbers, but perhaps they've not always been as scientific, those predictions, in the past. And we see this quite often where, you know, you might just assume that you're going to fill the classroom, reception, year 7, etc., based on previous trends. But there's a lot more data out there that can really help you refine and get to. I don't like using the word accurate, because ultimately all of these things are a guess. But it can help you to land at a you know, the most sensible scientific pupil number projection possible. Ultimately, you're all, you know, fighting for the children amongst other schools in your local areas. You'll be doing your marketing campaigns. You'll be, you know, doing your I don't want to, parents' evenings isn't the right word. Open days, that's what I was looking for, to attract those pupils into your schools. And that then comes with a lot of data. You've got access to the local authority admissions information, and using that data to help you understand or refine what those pupil numbers should be is really helpful. We've got pupil number challenges at the moment as well, with pupils falling over the next, you know, birth rate issues, pupil numbers falling, reducing over the next few years, and all of that is going to form part of that thinking and decision making around pupil numbers.
And I think part of the, you know, there is a national birth rate decline that's about to be hit in primary, and that's going to be fairly severe in some areas. Some areas, you know, you might be in areas where your schools are full and you've got more applications than seats, in which case, you know, brilliant. But for schools that aren't in that picture, it does feel that there's more risk around pupil numbers going into this round, and therefore utilising those potentially non-traditional data sets around, you know, how many prospectuses have we sent out, how many kids have done the open day, and, you know, does that correlate with previous years? This is data that not all trusts are capturing, but from an organisation that is thinking about risk assessing that pupil number that eventually picks you, what are those other data sets that you've got to get early warning if that number's going to be up or down? There is an argument that, well, actually, I get funded on my census, so it kind of doesn't matter, and there's an element of truth to that for budget setting, okay? Because, well, assuming you're on lag funding, your pupil numbers are set based on the census just gone. But a lot of what we're going to be talking about today is around class structures, curriculum planning, and building a budget based on the requirement. And that requirement could change based off of those pupil numbers. So it's an acknowledgement of, one hand, the funding doesn't change, but actually your curriculum plans and your class structures might change based on that, and therefore pupil numbers are important to understand because of that part of the dynamic.
Top tip 2. This links to what Will was just saying. So plan for and understand recruitment based on curriculum plans and staff structures. So rather than, you know, basing your recruitment plans on today, we know that's not going to change or change significantly. Let's think about this in the future. So, you know, as staff are leaving, rather than replace them like for like, let's consider this in the against the context of next year's curriculum design. It's, you know, some examples you could use: primary schools with those birth rate challenges and reducing pupil roles. You know, if you are merging your classes, 2 classes into 1 class next year, or 2 year groups into 1 year group next year, if a teacher leaves, rather than just replace them like for like, actually, let's consider next year's curriculum design and staffing structures to ensure that we are only recruiting staff based on what we need in the future, rather than what we've got currently right now. And And
In addition to next year as well, Warren, there's the potential to look a bit further out in terms of the year after that and the year after that. Now the further you look out, the less confident you can be in those assumptions. But it's a useful exercise to do because it certainly frames decision making, doesn't it? If you know that I've got a falling pupil role or a growing pupil role for the next 3 years, having that underlying information is useful when you're making staff planning decisions now, because you're going to know whether that problem is going to be getting better, worse, staying the same, rather than focusing on current class structure or even just looking forward to next year. Having that longer term view can just help give a more rounded view of the requirements.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess it's also that more aligned collaborative type approach to budget setting as well. So it's not setting budgets based on things that have always been there. And, I'm not saying budgets are set ignorant to or outside of sort of the priorities of the school, but actually if you are making sure that is part of the process, then hopefully you land in a much better place when you created those budgets, because you've been considering at all points during that budget setting cycle, what those future plans are, whether that's 1 year, 3 years, and making sure that the budgets being set are aligned and correlate to that. Top tip 3 then. So update your projected staff changes, and we know that when you're setting budgets, you're going to be, saying, oh, we've got these people leaving, these people starting. It's something that we see in every budget setting cycle, every trust, every school's doing this. But doing this earlier on, and making sure that you've got your start dates in for those people you're expecting to go on some form of parental leave, whether that's paternity, maternity, etc. Making sure that you've caught all of your starters, leavers that you currently know about. If you do that as early as possible, it gives you the best possible chance of recruiting the best staff that are out there. We hear this all of the time. We know it's true. Recruitment and retention is a significant challenge in the sector right now. And therefore creating those staffing plans that are aligned to your curriculum plans early on in that budget setting cycle is going to give you the best possible chance of recruiting, the best resource that is out there, rather than leaving it until July and you start to recruit then, having a firmed up understanding as soon. And look, I know these things change during the next 4 or 5 months, but you can get ahead of it and ensure that you're putting yourselves in the best possible spot to have access to the best people. You're on mute, Will. I don't know if you've hit your button.
I have hit the button. So the amount this will change over the next 3 months means it's really important to get some control around this process, because your V1 version of this will look very different to your final version or your V3 version, and therefore having some coordination around, okay, what changes have been made since the last one? Have we marked all the levers? Have we replaced them all with replacements? Because it's those sorts of things that often I say often is probably not the right word, but can get missed. And ultimately, the thing that will have the biggest impact of your budget is one of those scenarios. You've marked a lever without a replacement, or you've got a replacement without a lever. You're probably more likely to see that way around. But getting a handle of this is pretty important.
Top tip 4. Make sensible pay assumptions and reflect these things workings.
Are you going to say what that is? Well, please define a sensible assumption, Warren.
You're probably all sat there at the other end and say, stop taking the mickey, Warren, because I know how difficult it is to arrive at sensible assumptions. But there is information out there that you can use, and that information gets better to the point, you submit that budget to the ESFA, and I'm sure when you submit the budget, well, hopefully not, there's still some uncertainty around pay scales. I think they came forward a little bit last year, but again, not teaching how to suck eggs. Staff costs are the big proportion of your budget. 75, 80, 85% of your income tends to be the values that we see. And therefore a 0.5% or 1% or 3% increase on your pay scale values can have, such a significant impact on your bottom line. There's external guidance out there. I often, when I was doing it, I used to speak to peers, so other people in trusts that, similar role to my own, understanding what they were doing around pay scales. Most people are still operating the national frameworks around teachers' pay, NJC and support staff pay. So I could have sensible conversations, using that word again, conversations with these people, my peers, CFOs in other trusts, to understand how they were thinking about this. And that was one bit of useful information or conversation I was using to arrive at those sensible assumptions. There's external guidance that's out there. So ASCL have released some information recently. I think it was last week they released their budget setting assumptions. I used to, reference that information quite a lot. Used to wait for the pay bodies to make their offers. I used to understand the union stance. And all of those things combined, the macroeconomic picture, what inflation looks like and wage growth, and all of that information combined, I was using to arrive at those sensible assumptions. We'll come on to sort of scenario and what if modeling a little bit later on.
I think one thing to add to that is I was at a session a couple of weeks ago with 20 odd CFOs, and there was a lot that people agreed on, but there was also quite a lot that people didn't agree on, and therefore trying to find that unanimous agreement between peers is unlikely. And the interesting thing that kind of caused the biggest argument's probably not the right word, but I'm going to go with it. Was there was one camp that was saying, well, look, I'm going to allow for a small amount on the basis that anything above that gets funded, because it always has done historically. And there was another camp that I don't think used the word reckless, but they said, well, look, that's an assumption I'm not willing to make in terms of all the uncertainty potentially politically, and we're still in this weird inflationary time. Education funding is not in the best place. There was a part of the group that said, well, I'm not going to make those assumptions. I'm going to assume for a bit worse on my pay than I am on my income. And there was others that say, well, as long as I marry up my income assumption with my staffing assumption, the net effect should be minimal. I can understand both trains of thought, and this is unfortunately one of those ones where we'd love to say, go and do this, but you'd rightly not believe me and Warren. It's one of those where you've got to weigh up all of these decisions in line with trustees and get to a position that you are all collectively comfortable with.
Thanks, Phil. So top tip 5, linked to the previous point, we calculate and mitigate the impact of alternative pay award assumptions on budgets via what-if scenario style planning. So arriving at those sensible pay award assumptions is something that is important, making sure that you're comfortable with what you're assuming, what's in the numbers. Everything in the future is a guess at the end of the day, and based on historic trend and the way that the pay award process works, it's going to change. Like, I've never set a set of assumptions and been bang on. I might have got close to it towards the end of the budget setting cycle. But right now, whatever assumptions I make, I know they're going to be different to what's agreed eventually. And I think it's just this point is around having some plans up your sleeve should those pay awards be materially different to what you've actually budgeted. So running different scenarios, let's say I've assumed 5% on teachers' pay. I might say, well, what if it's 3% and what if it's 7%? And if it's 7%, I've got an extra 2% of cost that equates to X amount of money. What plans do we have in place to manage the risk of that extra cost in our cost base? And likewise, and as Will was saying, I actually used to budget like this, where I'd be sort of less on the income in terms of assumptions and more on the staffing costs. Should we see any money fall out into the budget because we've over-egged those assumptions slightly, what are you going to do with that money? And using it, I think often with risk management is focused on the downside, but there's the opportunity element. It's when you have positive things happen on in your budgets, actually having proactive, well thought through plans before that can be useful, because it means you can put them into place maybe straight away, not having to think about them at the point it falls out into your budget.
That's a really key point. So on, limiting downside or understanding the potential downside and the mitigating actions required because of that is a step that feels really important. The positive side, what we want to avoid happening is if there's some positive news, and actually over the last couple of years there has been plenty of instances where extra funding has come about, and it's not been kind of budget changing extra funding, but there has been pockets of money. And therefore, actually having a plan, an impactful plan of how that money can be allocated, because the danger is it gets absorbed into the budget. Because it's great, we got an extra chunk of money here, and that just gets absorbed. Whereas actually, if you're able to think about that up front, you could have potentially thought about a program or a series of activities or a way of really putting that money to work. But the only certainty is uncertainty, and therefore plan for the unexpected. 2 summers ago, was it the Teachers' Pay Award, Warren, that caught out everybody?
Yeah.
Bear that in
Well,
mind,
it
because
was released after submission date, wasn't it? So everybody said, "Oh, BFR in the bin." We've almost got to reset our budgets now, which is what you're doing with forecasting anyway. But yeah, I think that caught everyone out quite more than it has in the past. Okay, so top tip 6: consider and update budget assumptions for your key funding streams. And we've spoken about this in some way already. But those, gag funding for most of your schools is the core funding stream that you're going to get. And you've got your gag statements that are coming out now. Some have received, some are still expecting to receive that during this month. And so you can say with certainty, my funding for September 24 to August 25 is going to be this. But linking this back to the curriculum planning point around that multi-year piece and thinking about pupil numbers, driving projections around curriculum plans in the future, it's the same for income. It's all linked to pupil numbers, and actually making sensible assumptions around gag funding for future years is also going to be helpful when you're considering that multi-year piece. There's not a significant amount of data that's out there. You get some high-level picture from Whitehall, so next year your funding might be going up by, in terms of all schools, by 2%, but we know within that there are going to be winners and losers. Some people will get 0.5%, some schools will get 4%. So thinking carefully about your individual schools, the LAs that they reside, whether they're using the minimum per pupil and minimum funding guarantee sort of metrics within those gag calculations to calculate, sensible, prudent assumptions for future years. Again, gag funding being your biggest funding stream, anything that you apply there is going to have a big impact on your budget number. So I personally would err towards the side of caution, and then also for other funding streams as well, especially those where they're yet to be confirmed, and the amount that you're going to receive per pupil, or however that formula works, is not confirmed yet. Just being sensible with those things. P and sports grant, is that going to continue into September 24 onwards? I think likelihood it is based on prior years. UIFSM, recovery premium, that's meant to be ending now, if you're making any assumptions about that continuing. But just thinking about all of those things and leaning towards the side of caution when you're putting those grants into your budgets. Top tip 7. The final thing on here, actually, I missed my final bullet point. Assumptions should be shared with schools to ensure consistency. This is a big part of the session today, and one of the areas that I found most challenging when I was rolling out and managing budgets across a trust, because we had an assumption sheet, a spreadsheet, we'd send it out to schools, we'd put all of our pupil premium rate is this, our RPA rate is this, general inflation is this, and we'd send it out to schools, and then they would interpret that spreadsheet. They would then apply that to the numbers. We'd have to then take that back in. We'd have to check all of those numbers in the budgets to make sure that they'd use those assumptions properly, or as per the sort of document that we'd sent out. So making sure that you're sharing them with schools initially is critical because you want everybody to be applying the same assumptions in your budgets. So that you don't want half of your budget to be based on inflation at 1% and another half of your schools using 10%. That consistency is key, just to give you a bit more comfort at a trust level when you're sort of reviewing and approving budgets, that all of these things are being used in the same way across all of the schools in there.
And we've also said we expect these things to change. More information will materialise throughout this process. So not only do we make sure these assumptions are shared with schools, we need to have an update mechanism, and we need to have a mechanism to ensure that these are updated consistently and acknowledged by the schools and built into the budgets. And that's where it can get tricky. You've got all these things, thoughts are evolving throughout the next 3 months. You've got all these teams, all these spreadsheets. Getting that mechanism in place is time worth investing in, which will help you a little bit with that, hopefully later on.
Okay. So ensure increments are correctly applied, including teachers moving to upper pay scale. You're probably all doing this, but I have seen it quite frequently where somebody's missed incrementing somebody, and if you missed incrementing 2 M6 staff up to UPS 1 in your budget, and then that actually happens, you might have £10,000 costs going to your budget, and with costs, school budget being so tight, it can have a significant impact. You then start talking at £10,000, you're looking at reducing the amount of time or FTE in the school, and that obviously has a significant impact on the pupil experience. And I think, again, erring towards the more cautious side with this will ensure that you have nice surprises and not nasty ones. So if you think that people are going to apply to go through to the upper pay scale, I would probably budget for them to go through to the upper pay scale. And if they then don't go through, if they stay at M6, you've budgeted them at UPS 1, they're staying at M6, you've got an opportunity there that presents itself, rather than having to scramble around and find a load of money if they do go up. And looking at not just sort of those pay point increments, but also any payments that you're making for TLRs, SEM points, making sure that they're still appropriate as per your curriculum, and that they match your expectations. They're fully aligned to your school improvement plans, and you're getting best value for money from those extra payments that you're making to staff. Balancing that off with the recruitment and retention of staff as well. It's just a really important thing to focus on, making sure that I always look at it on a 3-year basis. I'd make sure that staff were, if they're M6 now, it's UPS 1 in year 2, UPS 1 in year 3, and then to year 4, 5, going up to UPS 2, etc. If you got anything to add in there, Will? Or...
No, that's one of the most common ones we see when we're looking at customer budget data, because they're moving. Anything that involves an individual to remember is just a mechanism that is worth focusing some time on. And this is, someone sitting at M6 and forgetting to move up to UPS and beyond is really common.
Consider expected churn and its net impact on your budget. This was actually something Will mentioned to me a couple of weeks ago, and I was like, I've never done this, but it makes so much sense because I know it happens. So I guess this isn't the case for all schools, but in lots of the schools that I used to look after, we would be basing a budget using the staff that are employed today, and we would be rolling those staff forward in the budget based on them, the expectation that they're still there. But I also know by the time I get to September or throughout the following year, that budget year that we've set, some of those staff that we based the budget on will have left. Generally speaking, at lots of schools, you would recruit, if you have, your more expensive experienced staff leaving the UPS 3s, etc., you might recruit some less experienced staff. One, because of budget pressures, But two, there are other reasons, in terms of that retention piece and having people around for a long time and getting that nice mix and blend of experienced and less experienced staff together. But let's say we've got two UPS 3 staff that we expect to leave, and we're going to replace those by an average of an MPS 6. That's 2 FTE. The difference in cost might be £10,000. So actually adding in two lots of £10,000 or £20,000 into the budget as almost like an income line or a negative staff cost, then from an assumptions point of view, frees up some funds to do other things with. You have to be very careful with this, because whatever you put into here may not happen. But if you have seen historically this happening and you expect it to happen again, then it's probably a nice thing to think about doing.
Well, I think it's better than the alternative. That was the main reason for this point, was we see lots of trusts rightfully acknowledge, well, my budget doesn't work. If I assume everybody that I employ today stays and increments and increases, we've got a big problem in year 3, year 5. And because of that acknowledgement, lots of trusts did lots of things, and they were all a bit fudgy in terms of, well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to just turn off increments for people. I'm going to turn off the pay award because of that problem of everybody incrementing, everybody increases, breaks the budget, which is a fair problem. It was I'm going to do other things as a bit of a fudge to protect my budget over the next 3 years. And therefore, the kind of growing trend we've seen is be deliberate about it. So let's not fudge individual pay progression. Let's think about what we're trying to achieve by saying, we know there are going to be some levers. Based on historical trends, we are expecting to see 1 person leave a year, 2 people, 5 people, whatever that trend is. Potentially down tune it a bit, just so you've got a bit of kind of prudency built in. And therefore do that calculation. I'm going to assume that 2 teachers leave this school each year, and the average teacher cost for that school is X, and we are likely to replace them at M1, M2, M6, whatever that is, and the cost for that is Y. The net difference between the two just helps replace that kind of incremental drift fudge or something else that you're doing. And it also then gives you a baseline of, well, look, we made the assumption of 2 people leave a year. That can now be an assumption that is reviewed and discussed annually. And you now have some theory behind a fairly important budget assumption, which does seem to be becoming a little bit more common.
Got 2 left. So understanding your non-funded calculated assumptions. I've mentioned staffing is 80% of your budget, but there's still a significant amount left, 20% of other things. Again, sometimes it's difficult to arrive at, we'll use the word sensible again, but sensible assumptions for non-staffing things. General inflation, there is RPI, CPI, forecast data out there. I think Askell have actually have added some of that into the information that they released last week. But I guess it's just like, make sure you're doing something. Costs are going to change in the future. It might be that it might be for individual contracts because you're ending a contract with a supplier and you've got to renegotiate terms with them. It might be general inflation across all of the other things, but just get those, have a conversation about those assumptions and do something with them, rather than just leaving things to run flat. Because if you do, you're probably going to get caught out with some unexpected increases in cost in the future. And I think giving budget holders a list of assumptions that are defined before you start that budget setting process is really helpful and useful. So we know this is going to move and change during the cycle, but if you can fix a lot of those in earlier on, then those that are setting the budgets, when they're making those plans and allocating resource according to those plans, they don't have to worry so much about, well, what if this assumption on inflation changes significantly, and then they have to, you know, react and do something with those plans. I think if you can give them a set of those parameters and assumptions as early on as possible, I think it just gives them a bit more confidence and comfort when, you know, creating and setting that budget.
It's also as well be sensible of these in terms of, well, look, some of these costs will be contracted, so therefore you have the grass cutting contract that is a 3-year contract that has an annual uplift built in. So where possible, where you've got individual budget lines that has its own multi-year treatment because of contractual arrangements, make sure those are baked in. Also think about budget lines that are likely to flex based on pupil number movement. If your pupil numbers are going up, then catering costs could go up to, you know, potentially not the staff point, but particularly on the ingredient side, well, actually, let's grow my catering cost to reflect my increasing pupil numbers, or vice versa. My pupil numbers are going down, therefore, which of my budget lines should be reducing based off that pupil number decline? So it's, you know, whilst this is 20%, only 20% of your budget, well, hopefully 20%, maybe it's 15, maybe it's 10, maybe it's, I think, 7%, somewhere I saw, is, don't forget about it, and, you know, think about how we can incorporate as much kind of logic into this as possible, because it should remove some of the opportunities for kind of emissions. There was a question, Warren, actually. So a question just coming around. I think it was linked to point 8, actually. So our previous CFO would include an attrition line on the budget. Is this similar to churn? It sounds similar. Obviously, not knowing kind of how it's been calculated, but yeah, attrition and churn, Paula, I would expect to be for that very principle.
So last preparation, top tip point, conscious of time. So check your 24-25 brought forward balances are correct. You're going to have a reserves policy at your trust, and you know, things that impact your level of reserves or your current year forecast and where you think you're going to land, and all of those future year budgets that you're setting. If you're focusing on next year's budgets, and you're using reserves to maybe supplement a deficit, or just making sure that you are meeting those overall reserve policy requirements, because the current year forecast feeds into that reserves number, it's really important that your budget is reflective of that latest forecast. I guess to get there, to make sure that your opening balances for 24-25 budgets are in the best possible place, then understanding your latest forecast and making sure that those forecast reserves position for this year are transferred to or used as your opening balances for 24-25, and that you're also keeping it up to date during the budget setting cycle, because the forecast that you create this month, you know, your reserves position, landing position for August is likely to change next month and the following month. So as you go through the cycle, making sure that that latest reserves forecast for this year is being reflected in your budgets, and hopefully you won't get caught out then. You know, we've set a budget that actually compromises that reserves policy, or we said we were going to supplement a school budget for school improvement purposes, and actually we don't have that reserve now. So just keep it up to date, and you know, put yourselves in the best possible position to navigate those things. So, budget review top tips. We've looked at the preparation phase. Going to have a look at now. You've done all of that work. When you're reviewing and looking at your numbers, what are useful things to be able to do? So, comparing your 24-25 draft budget to the latest outturn, to identify differences that should be considered. So if you've got income or expenditure in your 23-24 forecast, so your current year forecast, and then you compare that, you know, at a nominal code, cost center, management level, if you're comparing it at different places, you can identify where you've potentially got missing cost. So I've actually got in my forecast this year, £10,000 for a new license we've taken out, but we've not caught that in the budget in the following year. By doing that comparison, you'll spot these things, and then you can make sure that you captured it in your future year budgets if relevant. And it's just around completeness and accuracy again, so making sure that you know you're getting everything in the budget that needs to be there, and you're not omitting anything that is significant.
This one's really important. Too often, the budget for next year is compared against the budget for this year, and when you think about the budget for this year was prepared at this time last year, there's a lot of unknown information. So just being able to say what is my current outturn, because if you think about things like agency or overtime, it might be that we didn't budget for many of those things, but actually we've experienced lots of that in the year. So just being able to continually compare your most up-to-date out-term projection is really useful for budgeting, for spotting those things that are in the forecast aren't in the budget, or vice versa, things that are in the budget that aren't in the forecast. Now, obviously, there's scenarios where both of those things are okay, but it should be yeah, that is different, and I'm comfortable with it.
So number two, understand your year-on-year staffing FTE changes and ensure that your increases, decreases are in line with your curriculum and financial planning requirements. We've spoken around, you know, forgetting to mark somebody that's left or put their replacement in there, or you know, somebody that is starting, making sure you've caught them within the budget. And looking at that sort of year-on-year staffing picture, one, you can compare across your years, and you know, you can spot any trends or significant differences that are starting to appear, and start, you know, asking the questions why, you know, are my teachers falling by 2 FTE. But a critical part of that is then aligning that and correlating that to your curriculum plans, because there potentially is a genuine reason why those FTEs are reducing year on year or increasing year on year. It may be that you've forgotten to mark people as a replacement, etc., and that's a useful exercise to go through. But ultimately, coming back to your curriculum planning requirements, we've said we're teaching 6-year groups next year, therefore we're expecting to see 6 FTE teachers in our budget. It's for the following year, so we're expected to see 4 FTE teachers in our budget. And you know, considering that curriculum plan alongside those FTEs, hopefully will mean that you're not over budgeting for people, but more importantly, you're not missing any costs within your budget picture. Top tip 3: review SRMA KPIs against national and trust school specific benchmarking data. So this gives you an overview of how schools are performing in key areas compared to school with similar characteristics. And we always say, don't compare a small primary school against a large secondary school, because you're probably not going to get the most useful comparisons by doing that. But by putting schools together or comparing to schools that are more like for like, it can really highlight areas of inefficiency, scarcity, things that you can contextualize for your school. You can compare this against both your sort of national benchmarking data sets and then trust school specific benchmarking data. There are lots of comparisons that can be drawn. It doesn't have to be, or shouldn't just be, one set of data that you're referencing. You know, there's usefulness in referencing both national stuff and school trust specific things as well.
External benchmarking has a place, and it will raise some questions, but it's not going to give you that many answers. Whereas if you can bring internal benchmarking into the budget setting equation, both from you reviewing your schools against hopefully other similar schools in your trust, you know, depending on the school makeup, that may or may not be possible. But more and more we're seeing actually trusts get their schools together and benchmark themselves against other schools in the trust. Send the business managers together, get the head teachers together, whatever that might be. Look, you two are different on these things, discuss. And that isn't you need to do this or you need to do this. It's that you're two similar schools and you've got a different approach to doing this. Have a chat and understand why it's different, and whether that difference is a good thing, a bad thing, something that would work, wouldn't work. It just adds a really useful question and answer dynamic versus potentially external benchmarking is you're different, please justify. And you know, with the evolution of MATs and the merging of the line between what is a school thing and what's a trust thing, that national benchmarking is becoming more challenging each year.
And the final tip, and this isn't too dissimilar in terms of benchmarking. Well, it is. It's analysing per pupil spend on all expenditure lines and pupil adult ratios for all schools. I think it's quite difficult sometimes to create useful comparisons across schools, and probably the most useful metrics or set of metrics to use for comparison purposes is per pupil metrics. I'm not saying they're perfect in all instances, because they're not, but for a lot of spend lines, a lot of income lines, they're really good, can be really good indicators of inefficiency, over resourcing, etc. And
Or
highlighting,
just highlighting an interesting difference to explore.
yeah,
How are you spending or receiving X pounds per pupil, whereas this school is, it just completely removes the argument around sizes. It adds a really clean set of data that can identify things that look high or look low.
yeah, yeah. And those discussion points with other schools, it's what are you doing differently to us? What initiatives are they running? Activities that they're doing to potentially help you shape your practice in the future, so that you can deliberately allocate resource into other areas. So they are all of my top tips, or say our
Yeah,
top tips,
that's
IMP
what
top
it is.
tips. I'm not going to take credit for that,
Yeah.
but
Yeah, so hopefully there was some there that added some extra context onto what you're already doing. Hopefully some were completely new and you think, oh, that's something I'm going to try. The next part of the session is the fun bit, to be honest. I tasked Warren with, look, we've got all these challenges. We're talking about all these problems. How do we actually help you guys address some of these problems? So we've actually created a kind of an Excel template. We are the biggest fans of Excel, so that we'd love for you to use IMP Planner, which then means you don't really need the Excel template, but we want to be helpful anyway. And therefore, Warren's now going to talk you through the template that we've pulled together that is something that you may decide to use for your schools. It's really important though. It's an Excel template. We've designed it to be here's something we hope you find useful. But as is Excel, you can choose the bit you like, get rid of the bits you don't like, add bits, remove bits. Hopefully a useful document that can help you and your schools navigate the next few months.
thanks, Will. So I'll talk through the different tabs, but really this is how we would see this being used is the MAT start with this workbook in its current form, and then they do some things to make it specific and aligned to the context of their trust, so that from a coordination and calculation, timeframes type perspective, it can be used to support that whole trust budget approach. So in terms of the MAT instructions, this is as saying this is how the workbook should be used. These are the things that each of these tabs are doing and what you should be doing in those tabs before you pass it out to all of your schools. Once you've created the workbook that works for your trust, the idea is then you create a copy for each of your schools, you update the name in there, and then pass that over to the schools. You then centrally will be sort of coordinating or monitoring those workbooks for all of your individual schools.
And ideally, these are a shared document, not a sentence spreadsheet. If we think back to what we say around the likelihood of assumptions changing, they're live documents, because throughout the next few months, a lot of these assumptions will be evolving due to all sorts of information we don't know yet.
Yeah. So if you've got a central sort of storage point or thing that people can access, whether that's 365 or something, using that to roll these spreadsheets out would be ideal. So you would I've gone to the school instructions, and this is where, as a MAT, you are defining the things the school should be doing, concerned with, thinking about when looking at each of their tabs. And you can change all of the wording in these things. You might, want to say for the timeline, delete that wording and put your own, blurb in there around how those timeframes should work for your schools. But these are the instructions then that then feed through into the other tabs. Once you've created the instructions, I've got this MAT instructions tab here. So this is telling you how to use this tab. I'd delete that out, get rid of that, and then it becomes a school focused thing. I'd also hide or delete the MAT instructions as well once you've contextualize this to your trust, just so it becomes then a thing, with there's no noise in there. The schools can just focus on the things that you want them to see in here. In terms of timeline, you can add a school name in here. So Warren Primary. You can update those school instructions on the school instructions tab, and then you can put your start and end dates in for the various tasks that you're going to be doing during that budget setting process, creating that time frame. We've got a Gantt chart on the summary sheet that will show you that is feeding off this. You can add your own rows into here as well. So if you're doing more things or less things, you can add rows, get rid of things, like Will say, do what you want with this.
This timeline is, I'm sure you've all got timelines of varying degrees. Just having a written down, communicated timeline with a good old Gantt chart, and Warren was very proud of his Gantt chart at the end of this, so if you could all put some oohs into the chat, that would be much appreciated. It just adds that real clarity that everybody's working to the same deadlines, and that is a big part of the battle with what's going to be happening over the next few months.
Yeah, I've not done a Gantt chart before in Excel, I don't think, and I hadn't realised how easy it actually was. So thanks to YouTube for that. So in terms of pupil numbers, this is probably something I would expect schools to be filling out. So you might want to do this centrally, and if you are, then I would update those school instructions to let schools know that you are taking their sensitive information and adding it in here and doing those assumptions. But I might say I've got 30 kids in reception, 28 in year one. Let's add some numbers into here. I've got some pre-baked assumptions in here in terms of rolling forward pupil numbers. If you want to get rid of those, delete them, put your own things in there, fill your boots. It's completely up to you. But we try to make it as helpful, useful as possible as a starting point. I might say for my pupil premium numbers, I've got 50 kids that are FSM 6, 6 that are previously LAC, 5 LAC, 3 service children. These are my UIFSM numbers, get that acronym right. So 110 kids are taking the meal. 60 of those are already free school meal children. 100 kids are taking it in the January census. 55 of those are free school meal children. So we try to use. So go on, Will.
It's rolling those forward based on proportion. So it's looking at, you've got a bit of pupil number growth, looking at your pupil numbers, and therefore it's applying the overall pupil number growth to each of those lines as well. A question, Warren, actually from Paula is around, where do you get the LAC data from, as it's not on the census?
So is that the previously looked after children data, or the? I think the previously looked after children data is.
Put you on the spot now, Warren.
Yeah, you have. I'm trying to think how I would have done it. I mean, LAC's a little bit of a difficult one to sort of get on top of, LAC funding. I can't remember now. Sorry, you caught me.
Previous is included, it's the current.
Yeah. I don't know if we used to have conversations with the local authorities. I'll have a look and share it. But yeah, maybe it was a guess that we were making.
Estimate, I think, is the word, Warren.
Estimate, yeah, prudent estimate. I mean, I've been out of it for 18 months now, so I'm starting to forget some of these things.
And there's also a notes box on the side there, so it's worth saying if your schools are saying something is going to happen with pupil numbers, this is just a great place to potentially capture those thoughts. So both school and you are able to kind of look at what's going on.
So they're pupil numbers, funding rates. I've put some funding rates in here based on what I currently know. I've rolled those forwards at 0%, but apply your own assumptions in there. I've got the key rates for pupil premium, PN Sports Grant, UIFSM, the TPAG grant as well. Just on the TPAG grant, I've rolled it forward at nothing in future years. So I've said from September 24, that's the grant we're getting, up to August 25, and then in September 25, it rolls into your GAG funding. You can choose to do one or two things. You can continue to roll your TPAG funding forward and keep your GAG based on what it currently is, flexing on pupil numbers and an ordinary inflationary rate, or you might try and wrap or pull that TPAG funding into the GAG funding in September 25. I think that's going to be quite a difficult thing to do, but if you want to go down that route, then completely up to you. I've got some links to the latest guidance on all of these funding streams as well, if you want to follow through into any of those for the DFE guidance. And then you can also add your own other funding assumptions as well. So you might say early years is 3%, 5%, etc. You might want to change that to an hourly rate or something, and say it's £4.74, and then it's £5.13 in that. Yeah, completely up to you in terms of what you want to do in here. Other assumptions. So not focusing on those funding rates in that tab, which are driving some of the calcs, but anything else that you want the schools to use or consider when creating their budgets can be added into this tab here. And within the slides, we mentioned or spoke through sort of consistency and making sure that people are using the same things. You can use this tab to communicate along with all the other assumptions, funding assumptions, what things people should be using when creating those budgets. There is probably, an exercise for you to check that these assumptions are being applied correctly. But I think if you can get people using, or at least trying to apply the assumptions consistently to start with, then it puts you in a much better place when you come to do that review or check of your budgets. And then the summary tab just sort of combines a load of that information within those other tabs. And you might just want to use it for the funding, you might want to use it for the timeline, you might want to use the budget checklist, you might want to use all of those things. It's up to you, but it's all falling through into this summary tab. So I've got my pupil numbers, RAG rating those based on increases, decreases. I've got those grant budget values that I've calculated using those pupil numbers and those funding rates that are in the other tabs. I've got that Gantt chart that Will mentioned, so the budget setting timeline and how that looks over the next sort of 4 or 5 months. And then I've just got those assumptions listed out below that as well, so you can quite easily see those. And that staff churn number, and I know we're quite tight for time. I didn't cover that within here, but that staff churn number is within the other assumptions tab here. So I've said we've got 2 FTE, £60,000 is the average cost of those staff leaving, £45,000 is the cost of those people replacing, therefore 2 lots of the difference, 15 is 30,000, and that can then be added into your budget row as a negative staffing cost, or however you choose to do that. I've also got some checks here around before you approve and submit your total trust budget, making sure that you're comfortable with all of the school budgets and they're comfortable with them. So school can say that they have added the funding and applied the other assumptions. They said that the budget is complete, and then you've checked that and reviewed that for accuracy. You might want to add your own things into there or change the name of that. That's completely fine. And then the final tab, and it links to the prepare and review points that Budget Tips me and Will have been through today. It's just a list of those things in here. The target date for school, so communicating some target dates for really specific tasks, such as preparing those curriculum plans, making sure that they've looked at the increments across their staffing complement and are happy with those. The complete date can be filled in by the completer, which is likely to be a school user, and then a review date added by somebody in the central team there as well. And again, it's just around capturing as much as you can everything that is important within that budget setting cycle, and hopefully reducing the number of emissions or potential risk in there by people not doing these critical tasks.
Thank you, Warren. So that spreadsheet is available. You'll all be sent to that. Can you put the link in as well, Warren, into the chat? I don't think I'm able to. I think the chat's been switched off.
Let me have a look.
To download it. And whilst you look for that, we've got another question in. Are the pupil premium allocations, let's just move. Are the pupil premium allocations worked on the academic year as an average of total funding, including any increase from April 25?
So I've done it based on 7-month, 5-month split. So it's in terms of the rates in there, I've got the April rates in for pupil premium, and then the census data from the October census points doing 5 months, 7 months, and combining it.
Perfect. So hopefully that is a useful template for you guys. Whether you use all of it, half of it, 10% of it, just use the Gantt chart because it's really cool. My favorite bit. Warren's put the link in You've only sent that to panelists.
Oh, have I? How do I change that then?
I think you might need to put chat
Yeah,
on.
everyone. Right,
Yeah,
sorry
that's
about
right.
that. I'm not the best on Zoom,
There
are
we go.
we?
So there's that link where you can look at the blog that also gives extra detail for each of those points, and you can also download the spreadsheet to shape how you wish for your trust. We're slightly over, which is what always happens when me and Warren get on a webinar talking about finance. But look, thanks for sticking with us for the duration. Hope it was a useful session. Hope the blogs are useful, and hope the spreadsheet's useful. Ultimately, if we've been able to create something that will make the next few months a bit easier for you guys, then that's good news. So thanks very much for joining us. Good luck with the spreadsheets and the budgeting process. And thanks very much for joining this webinar. And thank you, Warren, for leading us through it.
Thanks so much, everybody. Thanks for joining. Bye-bye.
Brilliant. Thanks all.